Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out on this kind of sticky Saturday. Nice to be in the AC for a change, yeah? My name's Amy McWilliams, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Columbia Pike Partnership. We want to welcome you all here today, and also thank the library for hosting us. And we also want to thank all of our restaurateurs who've come to give you a little sample of their food. Starting on my left, the very first table is cookies from Dama Bakery and Restaurant. Next to them is Sabores Tapas Restaurant on Columbia Pike. And next to them is Cafe Saison, also on Columbia Pike. And then we also have the unmanned table is Takahashi Japanese Restaurant. Unfortunately, Mr. Takahashi has a busy afternoon and couldn't stay with us. And then at the very end is one of our newest Columbia Pike restaurants, Empanadas. If you haven't tried them yet, you must. So I want to thank them all for being here and sharing their wonderful food with all of us here today. So moving on to our panel discussion, I would also like to welcome Sushmita Mazumdar. She is our author of the Recipes for Recovery book. She will be available to sign copies. They will be available for purchase right over there. Next we have Megan Canody, who is the patient care director for VHC Pediatrics, who was one of the recipients of our Buy a Nurse Lunch program. And then lastly, we have Jessica Yanez, who is the owner of Los Chavacos Restaurant. It's on South Walking. And what we're going to do is just going to talk a little bit about how this book came to happen. So during the pandemic, a lot of organizations were kind of a little bit at sea, wondering how we could help. We were determined to support our business and restaurant community, and our first responder community, and our community in general. And we developed a program called Buy a Nurse Lunch. And this was crowdsourced funded from the community with small and large donors alike. This allowed us to provide meals to several health organizations, the nurses at VHC Health, at the VHC Children's Pediatric, at Mary Marshall Assisted Living, and at the Arlington Free Clinic. And we were able to sustain that for a year through the donations of the community, which was really awesome, because what it also meant is that we helped keep 12 restaurants going, right, in some really tough times. And so that's why, that's how that all came about. So Megan, VHC Pediatrics was one of those care facilities that were the recipients of these lunches. This wasn't aimed at the nurses for financial reasons necessarily, but it really had to do with the fact that they didn't literally have time to eat, let alone go out and get something to eat. What did it mean to have these fresh, warm and ready meals in the break room for the nurses at VHC Pediatrics?
That's a great question. I talk about this all the time, actually. It truly meant a lot. It felt like that we had a partnership with the community when, healthcare workers were, often shunned or scorned, or, we were the ones that no one wanted to be around. And so it felt like we were maybe supporting each other, like healthcare workers were supporting each other, and we get to work and we give each other a high five and say, thanks for coming in today, it's gonna be a tough day. But to have that extra support from the community, especially working at VHC, we are such a community hospital, and it felt like in all the partnerships, we truly had someone, put their hands on our back each and every day. There were times we went to work and there'd be nobody on the road. Everyone was staying home, working virtually. They had that, luxury to be home, but we were the ones going out. So it really did. It meant a lot to us, and to have like a warm meal ready for us was extraordinary. There were times where I'd bring a can of something in because you couldn't find anything fresh at the grocery store. You couldn't find lettuce, tomatoes, anything truly healthy and warm and hearty. To have that, it meant a lot to us. So thank you.
Awesome. Sushmita, I'm going to go to you next. So back in 2016, you spearheaded a project called Recipes for You, in which you interviewed Pike restaurants and got a recipe from them. Can you tell me how that project originated and how it led to today's book launch?
Yes, so that project was really interesting because the special projects curator for Arlington Arts, Cynthia Connolly. She came to my studio, which I had just moved to the Gates of Boston neighborhood. And she was like, we just got to meet each other and started talking about ideas. She was there for 4 hours. It was a fun, long meeting as creative people coming up with ideas. And she said, one of my dream projects would be if we could get recipes from Columbia Pike restaurants and have these recipe cards that people could take and try these recipes at home. And I said, oh yeah, that sounds awesome. And she said, yeah, but who has time for a project like that? And I said, I work with stories in my art, so I could do a project like that, except I would change it a little bit, because as a book artist, I would make the recipes into a book. So you take home a recipe book instead of recipe cards. And we were thinking of this at the Columbia Pike Blues Festival, and I could just see recipe cards on the floor and on the street flying around. And I said, what if I teach people how to make their own recipe book, in which every recipe that you picked was a recipe you wanted? So that was the idea. And then the second thing was, I said, people go into restaurants a lot, ethnic food, different kinds of food, but do they ever talk to the restaurant owners? Do we ever know their story? So I said, I would be really interested in getting a photograph of them and also getting their story, and then only if they want to share a recipe, that becomes an optional thing. So that is how it started, and Recipes for You is a handmade book that we launched at the Blues Festival, Columbia Pike Blues Festival, where I had a display rack with these 12 recipes, and then people could peel off the ones they wanted and we made it into a book. So that was in 2016, and then as the pandemic was happening and I would drive to my studio, I would see restaurants are closing. Restaurants, I had met the owners and interviewed them and shared their recipes. And I remember Cantina Mexicana closed near Walter Reed. And I was like, oh, I wonder what happened. Do I want to call them? Do I want to find out what would the story be? Because everybody's story was so terrible. Everything was so terrible at that time. And Maggie was just speaking, and I'm like, oh my God, I remember that. It feels like, those memories were like so strong. So I wrote to Cynthia again. I said I'd like to do a new version. It's 2020, but they were not doing that kind of work anymore. And of course, the CPP was a partner, because we were at the Blues Festival, we were at the farmers market, and so you guys said, so that's when CPP said, we will commission you. You go ahead and do it. So that is how. And this time I called it Recipes for Recovery, because I was wondering what the stories will be, and how my life is so different from the life of a restaurant owner. Like, what do I really know? All the restaurants are closed, and this social distancing and patios, just a whole other world. And I wanted to know about that. So that is how one thing led to another.
Awesome. Megan, as you know, the Columbia Pike, the nickname for Columbia Pike, I don't know if everybody knows this, but it's a phrase that we really embrace. It's called the world in a zip code, and that is based off of actually an Urban Institute study that was done back in 2010, where they looked at the region and very specifically at a couple of corridors, one of which was Columbia Pike, and they were kind of amazed at how many different languages and cultures were represented on Columbia Pike, and so they came up with the phrase "the world in zip code," which we have certainly embraced. The diversity of our restaurant community really reflects that story. And just to share a side note with you, Claudia Salazar, who owns Cafe Saison, she was one of the first restaurants to supply lunches for nurses in the program, and she once told us that for restaurateurs, they love with their food. Did that translate to your staff?
It really did. I mean, like I said in the earlier question, it was like receiving a hug or a pat on the back from the community. I'm a big believer in love languages, and it does feel like each person or job, they really do have their own love language. As a healthcare worker myself, our love language is to heal and to be with the community and to care for others. But in cooking, it's also a way to care for others and to show them and to support them. having that warm meal really, again, it did feel like someone was with us when we didn't have anyone but each other. The other really great thing about it is because we serve such a diverse population of ethnic backgrounds, we really got to try others' food. And I was just talking earlier, I don't speak all of the languages of the people that come to our clinic, but there's a way to connect with others, not just language. It's how you care for them, how you interact with them. And to be able to taste some of their foods was a way to connect with them. It was a way to say, oh my gosh, I just tried this. I know this is part of your background. Thank you so much. We found a way to connect and to really find ways other than just language to love each other and care for each other in such tough times.
So Jessica, would you tell us a little bit about your experience as a small business during the pandemic? I know you opened not too long before the pandemic. Was it?
No, we opened on 2021, January 21.
Okay.
When the pandemic was worse.
Yeah, and so could you talk to us about how being part of the Buyer's Lunch program made a difference for your business?
It helps a lot. Open a business was difficult with the pandemic, even worse. But help others, like she said, the community they help us. It's been so difficult as a small business or family, but if we help each other, I think this world will be different.
Yeah. And so, what does being part of the Columbia Pike restaurant community specifically mean to you?
All the community. I mean, the Columbia Pike has diversity, food, diversity, owners, and I'm happy to exist this organization, the CPP, because they connect each other and help us if we have any problem. And it means a lot for us to connect with Columbia Pike neighborhoods. We help with nursing program, with some programs for the school, too, PTA. So we like to help too, and the community help us too.
That's great. Sushmita, what do you hope the main takeaways are from your book, Recipes for Recovery?
The first project, one of my, something I felt really bad about is my goal was that the 2016 book, each of the restaurant owners would get a copy for themselves, so they would know each other's stories. Because what I found when I started interviewing them, because of course I have no background in restaurant business at all, that they are so overworked and they have no time for going out and meeting each other restaurant owners and knowing about them. So I wanted them to have a copy, but the way the printing and the project went, that never really happened. And so when we talked about this one, we decided, because this is going to be printed in a different way, that each restaurant will actually get 15 copies of the books, so that when they have a moment, they could read each other's stories and look at each other's recipes. Because this time it was worse. Not only did they not have the time, they didn't have the staff who could help, and they couldn't go and meet. We were not meeting people. So my idea for this book was many layers. If I can go and meet them and get their stories, maybe we can get those stories out, because they are not getting a chance to get those stories out because they're not going out and they're overworked. And also, as I interviewed each of the restaurant owners, we did a couple community engagement events where I asked, the guests at the events, tell me of these restaurants, who should I meet? What do you like? Tell me some stories. So I remember when I interviewed Jessica, I'd taken a photograph of this couple at the event who said, oh, they make the best, and I showed her that picture and she said, oh, they're my clients. So you know what? And then, of course, she kind of trusted me to tell me her story. But it's just like how we were not connecting like that the old way, So from this book, my idea was I would connect with them, I would learn how to connect with them at this kind of time and space, and then I would take their story out and we would share it with others, but it started with asking others why I should go to these restaurants, because then so it's so many levels in which community is part of this, right? There's so many ways, and of course the lunch program was something I learned that CPP was doing. It was like, wow. So there's just so many layers in which we can connect with each other, and just to have a chance to explore all of that and to put it in a book and to give it to the community so that they can see what they've already been doing. But also, if they haven't, they get these ideas to do it in so many different ways. So I think that is the thing that is how we recover. Because we have to help each other. There's no other way. This has to happen in community. So.
I did just want to ask if anybody has any questions. We're more than happy to take a couple of questions. But other than that, I don't want to keep you from that delicious food in the back of the room. Yes?
And maybe this might seem a little tangential. One of the problems I have with going down to Columbia Pike now is the construction. It's like everywhere there's construction, so I feel like you're still in recovery because people can't always get there.
It is an ongoing challenge, and will continue to be. I hate to say, but you do have to pick and choose a little bit. And there's certainly, like for some of our restaurants, who have, for example, outdoor seating, but watching a gas is drilling right in front of their patio, not super conducive to outdoor seating. But we will soldier on, and we will continue to do these types of projects to help continue to support our restaurant community. Yeah.
When you came up with the idea of the lunch nurses program, how long did it take to implement that program from like an idea to like, hey, here's the meal?
It was literally probably about a month and a half. It didn't really take all that long. People were so giving and so wanting to help. And I know that some of the hospitals were getting food from various restaurants, but that kind of dwindled fairly quickly, and so that's why it was so important for us to continue to push, because just because there's that kind of first push of giving and wanting to support and stuff like that, and then people get tied up in their own lives, and that can go by the wayside. So we were super active for a good 9 months to make sure that we could fund through an entire year cycle for that program. Yeah.
I would like to say something. I would like to say thank you to Arlington community, very great neighborhood. And I would like to invite you to go to the small business, because when you consume into a small business, you don't know how many families you help them. Example on the pandemic, because the customer came and consume, it keeps our employees. Yeah, so I'm very thank you for all these years for support us, and we have to keep doing hard.
And I think that is a perfect note to wrap this panel up with. Please go, help yourself, talk to the restaurateurs. They'd love to answer any questions you might have. And thank you to the panel. And there's books for sale.